In this video, we're going to explore painting fur. Now, the miniature that I chose, this wolf, it's from Game Zone Miniatures. This card here, because it's actually a goblin wolf rider. And here's the goblin that goes with him. I think there's about 5 different kinds. There's a shaman and all that. I actually painted this miniature. So I thought, well, I'm pretty familiar with it. I've painted it before, and it really was very accurate to a real wolf. So I thought it would be a really good piece to use for this demonstration. So here's our unpainted, primed miniature. This was primed with some brush-on primer. I actually mixed white and black together to make gray. Sometimes I'll prime a miniature white, sometimes I'll prime it black, sometimes I'll even paint primer parts of the miniature different colors. I may do certain areas white because maybe I'm going to have a glowing effect. Might prime certain areas black because I know I'm just going to use so many dark colors there that why should I fight working on white? This, I decided on a neutral gray. It's kind of a common theme with a lot of my miniatures. It's just like pastel paper. I start with a neutral gray because against this gray, the light colors will look light, the dark colors will look dark. When you start out with white, as you can see, these colors laid out on the palette, well, everything that's dark next to white looks really bright. And anything that's light next to white doesn't look like it has a whole lot of contrast. So that's why I like to start with this gray. I've got some of the colors out on the palette. These are the standard opaque paints that we'll use. There's some Vallejos, some Reapers, even Privateer Press. Again, I'm not really wedded to any particular company. It's just lately I've had more access to these and they work well for me. This is an olive drab, a leather brown, khaki. This is rucksack tan, ice yellow, ivory. This is a pale flesh, verdigris, and just a little smidget of this that we'll use. Called transparent red. It's kind of a very high chroma, translucent red. It tends to work well for things like the gums and the tongue, and even this. There's a little bit of the flesh tone inside the ears here, if you can even see that. Yeah, it's not much, but that little bit sometimes can make a nice touch. There are a few other things that I'll use. You'll probably see me use this glaze medium and this flow improver. This is made by Reaper. Reaper also has a glaze medium that they make. I like to use the glaze medium because that lets the paint stay wet on the miniature for longer, not just on your palette, but also here, which means then we can do some more wet blending and fun things like that. I've also got a series of washes that I'm going to throw out and glazes, but I'm going to talk about those when it gets to that stage. So right now I just want to talk about general paints we're going to use, some of these special mediums, and the last thing I'll have to cover is our brushes and our palette. I have some brushes set out on the palette in 3 categories. This is usually my starting point here, and these are called filberts. They come in a few different sizes. I've got some 4s. This is a 4. I have some 6s, and the advantage of these brushes is that they have this big flat surface here. It's also rounded along the edge. It means you get some really feathered brush strokes even with something this large. And I set it on its side here. You can see just how sharp this point is. So you get the best of all worlds. You have this broad, flat surface, but yet it's curved here, which lets you do some very nice blending. And then you have this really nice sharp edge. The next set, this is kind of the more really interesting set. This is a number 8 round. It's actually a craft brush, believe it or not. It comes in a set of 10. There's stuff like this kind of all over the place. You can see, not terribly expensive. Set of 10. You can see how nice the points are on this. For this big of a brush, that nice point, it lasts longer than you would think, especially for a 50-cent brush. What I like about these is when they do start to get a little long in the tooth, a little beat up, like this one. Well, these are excellent for painting your base, because this, you're taking a brush, you've got to jam it in here to make sure the paint gets everywhere. Well, why damage one of your better brushes doing that when you could use a brush like this? Last set I'll talk about, these are liner brushes. I prefer these to spotters because a liner brush, it holds a fair amount of water, pigment, and really will flow across your miniature much better. I have, again, just like these number 8 rounds, I have some that are a little more beat up. See this one here, the tip's not really all that fantastic. This is a brush that I use for my washes and glazes because they're very controlled. It's not just a giant brush and slather it all over. So I always have a few of these on hand. They're brushes that have kind of been beat up a little bit. Now you recognize this brand name here. I have a few. One of the Filberts also is American Painter. This is a nice kind of lower grade brush, not very expensive at all. Still makes some nice brushes. They will last pretty long. But again, if they get beat up, you don't really worry. It's a little easier to replace them. This is kind of a mid-range Winsor Newton. It's also a liner brush. This is about halfway in between the American Painter and the Winsor Newton Kolinsky Sable. So generally these get saved for the final details, whatever really precise work I need to do. And then this whole range, you can see we kind of went from larger to smaller. That takes care of our brushes. Next thing we want to talk about is this palette. And this is actually a disposable palette. I'll even bring out the package here. It's a paper palette, it's 9 by 12, 40 sheets. Really not all that expensive. And you just can't beat the cleanup. Because when you need to, all you do is just take this sheet and just rip it right off the palette. That's it. There's no washing of a porcelain tray or any plastic trays. It's just pull it off, throw it away. You don't have to worry about acrylic paint stuffing up your drains. So we've now covered our brushes, our palette, our paints. Now I want to talk about references and kind of a guide to helping you get the markings and colors for your wolf. Since I used to paint a lot of wildlife paintings, I have several calendars like this, just chock full of reference pictures. This one, I have several on wolves. I think this one is put out by the World Wildlife Fund. It's an older calendar, but pictures are just fantastic. Let's see if I can show you this one here. So this one, you can tell looks an awful lot like our wolf here. Obviously these days you can find just about any pictures you need on a quick Google search, but if you don't have a computer handy or an iPad, sometimes old-fashioned calendar. Now there's a lot of different markings for wolves. I wanted to see if I can bring out, okay, this is more of a standard wolf. There's black wolves, white wolves, gray, red, everything in between. But this is what we're after here. And I thought I might do is just do maybe a quick little painting session, a wolf on a flat surface, just to kind of give you an idea the markings on the all-important face. A piece of Sculpey out here makes a nice painting surface. So what I'll do is I'm just going to take my pencil and draw this out very quickly here. And you may even want to do this yourself, a little bit of a practice run on a flat piece of paper, flat piece of board, whatever, just to experiment with your own colors. So we're just going to draw this out really quick. And I'm going to throw out a few of the colors that we're going to use for our wolf. And then we're going to do a little quick painting here. Just kind of introduce you to the colors. Okay, just to give you a general idea, wolf markings, throw out a few colors on the palette here. So there's some darks, a few little kind of middle tones. We have our lights. So push this forward so you can see what I've done here. We have kind of the global palette. You hear me talk about this a lot. You have kind of this palette within a palette, this local palette here. What I do is I take kind of a dark color, I make sort of a middle tone, and then I have the light version right here. And this is like this little family of colors. This is kind of the whole population here. This is one little clan right here of colors. It's a little bit warmer. This one's a little bit cooler. So this is kind of what we'll also be doing with our wolf, but in 3 dimensions. I'm starting out, see with this lighter color. It's not very light. It's not going to be our lightest lights, but it is going to provide some contrast when we start to do things like this. The eyes, the ears, this kind of the mask that you see a lot of wolves have, and you can see I'm just working wet into wet. We'll do a fair amount of wet into wet. And see what I'm doing here already, very early in the process. This is called a directional brushstroke. This is going to be really important when it comes to this miniature. Even for all the fur texture that's there, what we really want to avoid is just the simple dry brushing of the fur and then maybe throwing on a wash. That's not what this is about. This is supposed to get us a little bit more out of our wolf. And to do that, we need a little more advanced thinking. And that means we have to consider a slightly different method. So again, all this is all early stages here. I'm going to go back into this with more lights, more darks. And I can see in some areas on this wolf, see this kind of a light yellowish tan. We also want to introduce that here. And it's easier to do it at these earlier stages now, and then try and kind of artificially slap it on later, saying, oh geez, I need some yellow in there. So you can see we're moving our way around the face. You can see I kind of work in a circular motion. I start here, over here, working in a circle. I do the same thing on the miniatures. I work in this circular pattern. See, even here, or even at this early stage, I'm still thinking about the direction of the brush strokes. Even here, even when it's wet paint and I'm just manipulating wet paint, I'm still thinking about brush strokes. Which direction are they going to go? This is really important for fur. If you want it to translate well onto the miniature, well, you've got to think about that. And let's see how on the edge here. Now, of course, this won't be happening on a miniature, but even just this. We're going to get down to painting individual hairs like this on the miniature, because again, it's going to show a little more depth to our painting. Again, more than just a simple dry brush with a wash over the top of it. And see, as I start to pick out the markings under the eyes, I'm going to do the same thing. See right here, we've just made that marking right there. Now let's have this other part of the mask on the face, and that's going to be underneath that, about here. And it comes up the side of the face. Start here, work our way up, and then see how the first row, they kind of generate from this point and they spiral out. It's the same thing here. So let's do a little more. I don't want to get too involved with this, take too much time just painting this flat little piece, but I thought this could be very handy, just a very handy little exercise to get the ball rolling. We're going to put these little dark spots on the tops of the ears, just like on him. And you can see I'm going to put in some darks now. Now, on our miniature, this is going to take more the form of a wash. Here, I have to work a little bit differently because it is just 2 dimensions. We don't actually have fur texture sculpted in. I have to kind of simulate that. It's interesting, on a miniature, you have to simulate shading and almost make some parts of it almost seem 2-dimensional. But in a painting, you have to do just the opposite. You have to show dimension. Now here, obviously, the mouth is closed. We don't have to worry about the teeth and the gums. It's not exactly a snarling wolf. And the nose marking again, just like what we have here. We're going to need the eyes. Again, this is just a quick exercise, a quick representation of what it is that we're going to do on our miniature. And what this does is, having this, I can maybe refer to it when we get to some of these important areas on the figure. Now, here, the other reason I did this is I want to show you. So I just grabbed a cooler color here. I've been working in all of these warms, so I just grabbed some of that verdigris. And what this does is it creates a nice contrast. In some places. So again, the idea here is just we have a little something that we can look back at and say, hey, remember what we did on that face, on the piece of Sculpey? Now here, just the opposite. I'm going to take some of this yellow and indicate this a little more. It's like the eyebrows here. And just like we did on our nose, see how we delineate the top from the bottom? We have to do the same thing here. So all the same things that we're doing here, we have to do here. I'm going to grab one last color, a little black. Now we're going to do this mostly with other colors, there washes. Just want to show how dramatic the effect is. And all of a sudden we introduce just a little bit of black to this. So around the eyes, up here. All of a sudden just that little bit goes a long way. And same thing on him. You see all kinds of color variation. This is almost a little more bluish, purplish, more yellowish. Some parts will be a little more green. You can see, you can really see the verdigris right here on the wrists and on the haunches here, a little bit on the tail. So with this quick little exercise out of the way, now let's actually get into the wolf itself. Let's get down to the painting of our wolf. Now what I've done is I've magnetized the base here, which lets that stick to my piece of sheet metal on an empty paint jar. Because he's heavy, what I'm going to do is put a little blue tack on the ends to make sure that he doesn't try to go somewhere right in the middle of our painting. Now you could also, normally I would just take him and put him on a dowel rod and paint him that way. But here, just put him here so it'll be a little bit easier for you to see. That way I can set him on the palette. We've got our colors laid out here. Our browns into our tans and into our lighter colors. Just like we did with that wolf face. And we worked from the middle and then darker and lighter. And let's do the same here. So I'm going to get this brush and one of my filberts. I'm going to start to mix up a few colors. I may have to throw some back out on the palette if they run out. I want to make sure is that I've got that same, remember those families of colors that we put together before? So again, it's darker, working its way down to a lighter tone. I also want to make sure that I've got the same thing with my cooler blues. So let's throw a little bit more of this out on the palette here. There we go. And start mixing. So there we go. And sometimes on a miniature I might even work with 2 brushes. Because what that does is it lets me work just that much quicker. Lets me maybe work wet into wet. So you can see now this gray versus the neutral gray. Look at how dark that is on that white palette. If this miniature were primed white, I'd be putting this on. Oh my gosh, it's not a middle tone, that's dark. Well, actually it is, because look at how light it is compared to that. Look at how light it is compared to that. So it really is a middle tone, and at least here we haven't disguised it. You don't have to worry about mistaking it for a dark because of what it's compared to. And it goes the same for this cooler color, which is almost going to be the exact same gray as the primer. As you can see, I'm working all around the miniature. My goal right now is just to make sure that everything has some paint on it. Now I might even think about, okay, the saddle area here, well, that's going to be a little bit darker. Let's take some darker paint. So I'm actually letting that mix together with what I've put out before. Same thing on the tail. We know this is going to be darker. We know we're even going to change the hue of this. But I'm just getting some indications of light and dark. Same thing on the paws. I know I want that to be darker. I'm just going to work my way around, making sure that everything is covered. I'm going to brace this, kind of jam the brush into here, just to make sure I've got actual paint there. This is the other reason why I like to have miniatures either on a dowel rod or on some kind of a little paint jar like this, because I can turn this upside down and then really go at it. And I'm actually bracing the miniature on the palette. Now, of course, this is a clean part of the palette. It's always a good idea to look and see what's on your palette before you do something like this. So there we go. So what I've done, just quickly throw out some colors, and you can see I've already started to indicate, okay, again, this is the darker saddle. I know I want that there. I know I want this to be a little, I might even go a little warmer into that tan. And I may, see, this is the middle tone. What I've done in some places on this guy is actually taken the cooler highlight color and put it over that warmer middle tone. It's the same thing we did here. So while, see that, as you can tell, the color is all kind of glistening. Well, it's pretty wet everywhere. If I wanted to really encourage that, that's what the glaze medium is really helpful for you. Just, you would mix that in with your paint. Make sure it's shaken up pretty well. And I just would have some out here in each of my colors. I'd mix a little bit of that in. Put it on here, and that just stays wet for so much longer. So what I'm going to do is put out some more of my colors here, especially the verdigris and the pale flesh. Not the yellow, we got plenty of the yellow. There we go. So you can see at this point, I don't even have the ivory out on the palette yet. It's too early for that. It's too early. I have other things that I want to do. So let's start to lighten up the underside of the torso. And I can see just how much paint, look at how that flows across my hand. This is not a dry brush. This is just, that's what I love about these filbert brushes. It's this broad surface. It's letting me do is just, it's letting me paint. You can see I'm not necessarily pressing all the way down, not necessarily eliminating all my darks. I'm mixing as I go. Just a gentle stroke. And remember the directional strokes I talked about on here. It's the same thing here even. It's not really going to show necessarily, but I'm thinking I'm going this way. I'm going to work with the sculpted texture of the fur. What if we want to get a little bit cooler here? So I'm going to make some of the verdigris in. So again, same thing. We're building up by mixing. We're not just slapping down a flat pink color and then just throwing stuff on top of that, glazes, whatever. We're actually doing a fair bit of mixing here. So here on the nose, what's nice is this. Just let me pick that. It's exactly what I need right here on this side. I'm going to hold it even closer so you can see this. Just like that. Just one stroke. One more. So we've just indicated all the lights around the snout, this part of the face, underside. So what I'm trying to do is more with less. Now if I was using a little tiny liner brush like this, well, somewhere around 20 years from now, we'd be done. We'd prefer to get this done a little sooner and maybe have a little more fun with it, and that's where this filbert brush comes in. Now you could use the number 8 round also for this stage. Let's get some mixed up here. You could, but I don't want to, it's a little almost too early for this yet, even for this amount. I don't want to get this. See, it's not mixing quite as much because I got this super sharp point. And that's why I'm trying to take advantage of this brush. You can see, look at all the brush all the paint and gunk in this brush. Well, that's a good thing. I can even take some of that out of there. That's why I call it the thumb palette. Now here on this top side of the paw, same thing. Over here. So now again, if I want to see, well, where am I really at with my lights and darks? Well, I don't have to look much further than this palette here. Because while this doesn't seem to be terribly bright, well, let's look at, there's the color that I'm using. Well, that's a little bit darker than white. That's still fairly light. That's because we're waiting to do some of our shading and glazing along the saddle part here. But again, we're setting that up now. So I kind of refer to this as the shaded base coat. You'll never see me do just a flat base coat where I just grab this verdigris and just paint one little section. You can see this is my base coat here, and all this swirling mass of color, that's my base coat. So when you start from there, in the end, your end result is going to have more interest than if all you did was start from a flat color and just add a little bit of shading to it. Now as the color actually starts to dry a little bit, let's do this. Now this is something I call damp brushing. So again, see there's plenty of pigment on that brush. Do on the shoulder here. And I'm just going to pick out. See if I can get this a little closer for you here. So all I did was pick out a few areas on the shoulder to do that. On the over the eyes here, take this brush, one there, one there, and we're going to do the same thing here. Again, this is not a dry brush because the color we're putting this on is wet, and the paint on the brush is still pretty wet. And now here you want to be a little careful with this, because then it's going to start to get muddy. You fool around too much, you go back and forth, and the enemy of good is better, and that usually turns things to mud. I'm going to grab a little more of this yellow because you can see there's some indications here. Some of that yellow. So it's just a few little spots. Pick these things out. Like that. Now if you do something like this and you go, oh my gosh, I hate that, what did I do? Well, you just, wow, yeah, that was hard to fix. All better. That's why I kind of like the shaded base coat, because you don't necessarily get to that point of no return. By working on all these sections all at the same time, and I've had this happen to me way back when I first started painting, and I would just do, I just work on this part and nothing else. Inevitably, I would hit the completely finished section as I was trying to put paint into, well, the next section that had nothing on it at all. And I started to realize, well, if I had paint everywhere, and all I was doing was just some of the finish work on these different sections, instead of trying to paint a whole new section right next to a finished one, it sort of was a disaster prevention mechanism. I'll call it that. So now, obviously this type of base coat, since I'm going to call it that, it's going to take a little bit longer than the standard base coat, which is just sort of take a color and slap it on the miniature as fast as you can. This is a little more elaborate. Now let's do these. I'm just going to indicate where they are. Just don't want to forget them. There's lots more to do there yet. So I'll just leave that be. Now at this point, what I may do is either dry this off, or now maybe I can go in with this and start to pick out some lighter areas, because we're already, even though this is technically, I'm considering this a base coat, we are putting on some shading as well. And the idea is to work lighter with the concept that what we're going to do is put in the darks later. I'm kind of picking out some of the areas that I know I want to be light. It's all about under the eye. I want to indicate that's there. Because again, I can always work back with the darks. So now what I can do is thinking about about letting this dry maybe. If you want to dry it faster, use a hair dryer. That may not be good for certain types of resin figures, but this is a nice solid metal figure, so I wouldn't have to worry about that. So if you're doing this with your shaded base coat, as I call it, and it's pretty wet like this, before you start to do all that glazing and shading and tinting, you're going to want to make sure that it's dry. So we're going to conclude this phase of the miniature, and that would be your shaded base coat. You can see we've already really indicated where a lot of our lights and dark lights are going to be. Now it's all about working darker. At this point, we're getting ready to put in our darker colors, and this is going to be the glazing phase, glazing and shading. Again, we have all the lights we need right now. We want our darks, and I've got a few these out on the palette. These are actually from Secret Weapon. Might actually throw out. I have these. These are from Vallejo. I also use these too. We've got a sepia, two different kinds of kind of brownish. We have a blue black here. This is a very dark, heavy body black. And this is made by Reaper. It's called Blue Liner. They actually have a brown, a gray, and a blue. I'm going to use the blue here. That's what I'm going to do is mix that with the black. That's what's going to help me make some of these darks that have a bit of a bluish tint to them. So, remember I talked about having some of these liner brushes that are a little bit more distressed. They've been well used. Like this guy right here. This is the kind of brush we're going to use. So let's throw some of these out on the palette. We may not even use every single one. I just like to have them out. So here's our sewer water. These are very liquidy, and they will splatter a little bit, so you just want to be aware of that. I throw out some of the armor wash. It's kind of a more of a grayish brown. And some blue black, which is it's a little more liquid version of the blue liner. So we're going to throw that right out here, right next to it. And some heavy body black. That should be more than enough to get this done. Might actually throw out a little bit of the, because I've noticed that this is already, I don't know if you can see it, this is a little different. There we go. This is a little more almost reddish than this black. Okay, so what I'm going to do is pull some of these down, see what I've got. I got all these little different color tones. Now, you can see here on our wolf, got this kind of a golden color here. Well, that's what this is for. So you can see that I'm just working in select areas. I'm not doing the whole thing all at once. I'm just choosing, just picking out an area. Just picking out an area and letting the washes do the work. Once it's in, so I can pull it down. You can even take it away with a paper towel if you want to. You can kind of add and subtract with these, which is nice. Do the eye socket here at the top. Again, don't want to do too much too fast. Sometimes I use my finger to take it away. But usually what I'm doing is I'm kind of preserving some of my highlights. Let's have something on the paws here. And don't be afraid to mix. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this. And I'm going to take away the extra with my finger. Same thing here, down on this paw. So just like we did with the paints, and there's this global palette, but we're making little families of colors. So what I'm doing is I'm making kind of a darker brown here that I think is going to work just fantastic right there, in conjunction with some of our, you can even brush it away too. See, I'm kind of taking my paper towel, put some on, dry off the brush, and pull some away. Now, this is probably going to seem, for a lot of you, this is going to be really, really strange. Not going to be used to it at all. But I'm going to show you something. I've been working mostly on one side, just so you can compare what we've done in a few minutes here. Let's flip this over. Look how light that is. Flip it back over again. So in moments, we went from this to this. And that's why I enjoy this method. Because it lets me be a little bit freer. Now I can always work more detailed if I want to. So here we're going to go over the top of the teeth. Back to face. And just using a brush to drag that around. Just like that. Trying to get as much variation as I can. Let's hold this a little closer for you. So you can see this yellowish brown that I start with down here. Here's some of the more brownish black that I've mixed. And the thing you want to consider also when you're doing this, I just wiped away some with the finger there. Just how we're kind of layering light to dark. We're kind of doing the opposite here. We don't want our deepest dark right away. We're going to take our time. We're going to work our way towards those darkest darks. We're going to work slowly. It will, in the end, it'll save you a little time and effort if you do that. Because then you won't have to go back into your middle tones and do quite as much work. So it's not about the darkest parts of this whole saddle area. It's just about, here we go. Now, of course, if you've got a miniature where there's no fur texture at all, and you just have to kind of paint it in yourself, I know there's a few miniature companies that do that. Well, that's where you're going to have to kind of paint it in artificially like we did on this little test piece here. But I know in areas like this, I know I want some darks to work their way down, so we're going to do that. There's also something else you can do at this point, and we've still got paint out on this palette. We could even do something like this and make kind of an interesting gray. Put this here. So there's a host of different options here. I guess that's what I'm really trying to, I'm not trying to show you one way to paint this wolf, and it's the only way, and there is no other way to do it. What I'm trying to actually do is present you with as many different options, because maybe there's one you're more comfortable with. And you may have to adapt this whole style of painting to your own. You may have to take bits and pieces of it, not all of it. That's how it was for me when I was back in art school. I couldn't do everything that I saw my teacher do. I had some parts I just wasn't comfortable with for whatever reason. So here we're taking some of that blue liner, some of our heavy body black, and you're going to see that's much darker. And that's because we're kind of at the stage of our glazing here where we can think about working a little darker, but all the while trying to be aware of all these different patterns and shapes on the face. So again, what I've done here, this gray that I've created, that's a perfect spot for this. Perfect spot for that. Can wipe some of it away with my finger, blend it out with the brush. So again, the whole process here is all about finding what is most comfortable for you. Man, it's going to take a few miniatures, and I would maybe suggest you start with a simpler project first. Don't start with the most difficult possible thing you can think of, because you may end up being disappointed and think, oh my gosh, this technique's never going to work. And it was more because you set yourself up a really difficult task. Now at a certain point, you can also dry off what you've been doing, your shaded base coat. I'll show you then, let's take some of the blue liner, mix it with some of the brown, and just do a little bit of this. Indicating some of these darker areas. Same thing there, the ends of the paws. Got just a little tiny bit of our blue left. Let's lighten up this paw a little bit. And we're working again, wet into wet. There's nothing that says you have to only do the shaded base coat part and then only do the washes, and they're two completely separate phases that can never be mixed together. Well, yes, you can do that because some miniatures just call for that. You can see I'm trying to make sure that I don't get too wrapped up in let's just do the face. Or let's just work on this paw, let's just work on this tail. Constantly flipping this thing around, constantly working on a different part. And you can even just sit it down on the palette, rotate it around, and work on it if you wanted to. Anything that kind of keeps you from getting too stuck on one section. So you can see what's fun about painting this way, that I haven't had to go in and paint every single little hair on this guy. I'm trying to let the miniature do as much of the work as possible by using these glazes. Again, the fur is reasonably well sculpted on here. That never hurts. It can make your life easier. There have been some figures where it's just so difficult to work on because it's just not sculpted very well. I've certainly been there. I can see what I've done here. I've taken the blue, mixed it with that light tan. Let's make kind of a little different color, a little bit cooler. And throw some of that in here and just let it mingle. And when all this dries, we're going to go back, and that's where we're going to try and introduce some interesting new midtones, some contrasting midtone colors like these blues. In other areas, we might even be throwing in more warm colors. You know, most people don't really think of mixing washes with paint. I like it. I think it's very fun to mix washes and paint together. And you'll see me do that in an awful lot of miniatures. And you can see I've done a fair amount of work with a brush that's really kind of nasty and beat up. That's the other advantage of this method. I didn't have to I used a relatively inexpensive filbert brush, a 50-cent craft brush, and now a semi-destroyed $2.50 brush. And we've gotten this far already just with that. And what's that done? That is saved our nicer brushes here for that finished stuff that we're going to do later. It extends the life of the brushes you really, really care about. So at a certain point, I'm just going to call this glazing stage satisfactory, let it dry, and we'll move on to the next part. With all of the darks now pretty well established, all along the saddle and the face, down on the paws, it's time to start to work in what I call the middle tones. And that's pretty simple. That's just what's halfway between the darkest darks and the lightest lights. And in this case, the middle tones, I'm going to add some of this. There's a little bit of hints of a bluish gray here. Same thing down on the ends of the paws. Some of this warmer color that's worked its way into the fur. That's some of the things that we're going to do in this next part. So I'll put him over there. Now I've got out on the palette that blue, some black here, some olive drab. Put that khaki back out. We've got the rucksack tan, a little bit of the yellow. See some of our lighter colors here, verdigris. There's my blue liner paint. That's out there. So that I can do things like this. A nice kind of a bluish gray. We don't have a lot of that on the miniature. And if we need that to be even more of a bluish gray, like so, because that's going to go here on the ends of the nose. Let's, it's right there. A few little isolated bits on the forehead. Now you can go with, see right now I've got the larger craft brush, but you could also use a liner brush. Here I'm being a little more selective about where I'm going. I don't want too much. The idea here is just to put a hint of that color down. That's all this is about. What I'm going to do is on the underside of the tail. This is where some of that cooler color is, so let's and I'm just putting a little bit on this side. Turn this around. I'm bracing. It's another nice thing about having on here. It leaves me the option of really bracing my fingers, both hands kind of secured together. What I'm doing, I don't know if you can really tell, but I'm after some of the areas where, see, even here you've got this, okay, yes, there's supposed to be a darker crevice there. I don't want it to be just dark brown. I want there to be a little more, something more interesting color-wise going on. That's something I learned in my oil painting class. Well, in watercolors too, that this expression that your dark areas need to be more interesting. A shadow that's just dark is just a large mass of boringness. So if you have some, so I'm putting these cooler, warmer colors, some more grayed down, some less grayed down. In the darker area, it's just to make those areas a little more interesting. Same thing in here. Maybe there's some parts that get a little more gray than others. Maybe some you want more warm. And that's where we're going with the tan. And for right now, just working with this bluish gray color. Want some on the paws here. So what it does, I've kind of put some there. Well, let's lighten that up a little bit over a couple of stages. So we put that first layer down. Let's move it closer maybe so you can get a good view of this. Same thing on this paw here, because again, we established the dark parts of this. Now we're going to go back and make this light. And I can even make sure that this color is repeated by maybe putting some on the base. You can see that there's a good amount already there. I tried to ensure that this color wouldn't be just some kind of weird color that's only in one spot on the whole figure. So we've got this lighter color. I'm going to go on the underside of the tail here. And now these next couple of final stages of the miniature, that's where This is where we're picking out the details. We didn't want to get bogged down in these details in the shaded base coat section. We didn't want to do that in the glazing and tinting section. Those are all about being kind of open and free. I just work my way around. I can keep making this lighter if I want. But it's still not, you can see, we're still in the middle tones. We're not in the highlights yet. Still is middle tones. I think another expression I've heard used for them is halftones. And, well, it's pretty obvious why, because we're halfway in between light and dark. And feel free to do almost like what we did with the, when we did some of our dark glazes. Feel free to maybe wipe some of it away. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Just here and there. I'm going to work my way a little, one step lighter. And you can see just following that principle of all of the colors have been bulked in. So now all I have to do is just pick and choose. Okay, I want to bring this area out more. I want this area to recede. And you do that by contrast in value, how light and dark it is. You do that by the warmth and coolness of the colors. And you can see here this part of the face just by adding it's still really kind of a middle tone. It still brings out some parts of the muzzle, and that's good. It means that we have enough space along the value chart to work with to make things brighter. Down here on the paw, I'm going to do this, wipe some of it away, do this, kind of dab away. Something on this paw. On the ankle here. And I chose to use this bigger brush so that I still wouldn't be tempted to get bogged down in just one spot and just keep working there. And it's almost like I'm forcing myself not to do that. And eventually, not too long from now, I am going to go into my smaller line of brushes and start to work on some more small stuff. So I've added that kind of bluish gray color. Well, let's get some dark, really dark colors in here. So there's blue liner, there's some black. I'll keep some of the olive drab handy. So let's get really dark here. Just a few select places, maybe the end of the tail. Flip this over. And taking away the excess. Now on some parts of the saddle here. Along the paws. Along here on the top of the head. Tiny bit here on the front of the nose. Put some on the back of the ears here. So now I'm going to bring out this liner brush. And I'm just going to put a few, these aren't our final lights or anything of the sort, but I just want to indicate where the eyes are going to be. And just like the face that we've done here, I want kind of an amber look to the eyes. I just need to see where those are going to go. Just to get that established. Now let's take this and let's do a few little tidbits on the fur. So yeah, a lot of this stuff is much more subtle. It's not going to be anywhere near as dramatic as what I was adding in those earlier parts of the miniature. I'm just saying, well, maybe over here I want a little of this, maybe over here I want a little of that. Still not working super light just yet. Still about those middle tones. Won't be long before we start to get into the lights. I'm going to put some here. Let's do some of this on the pads here. Same thing on this foot. So now we've worked a good long time in the middle, so now it's time to get lighter. I'm gonna throw a few lighter colors out here. So I've just mixed up a few. I got more of a reddish, more of a blue, more of a yellow. And this, you'll probably notice when I add this stuff a little bit more, just like there. See where the ribs are here? On this underside of the wolf. Let's make sure it's not all just reddish. Let's add some more of the bluish gray. I already said we're just by picking out these few hairs that really stands out, because we've done all this other work first. We didn't go right to the highlights. We've tried to leave the highlights for as long as possible so that they actually have a little more dramatic impact than just, okay, well, there's some light colors. Right here on the top of the wrist. Because by doing all this down here, that meant I had just enough of the dark to show some of these lighter colors. And we can go lighter still, because our ivory, that off-white, is still one step lighter than what we're adding now. It's just if all of a sudden right away the white is out there on the miniature, well, you haven't left yourself a lot of room to work with. So let's pick out a few of these hairs along the ribs here on the underside. Again, this is not a dry brushing thing. There's plenty of pigment on that brush. It's just kind of using the sculpt, finding where the fur texture really is and working with it. So I'm going to go back into the tan and use a few little lighter tan strokes there. Now here on the face, under the eyes, that's going to be important. See how this starts to look a little more dramatic. Same thing on the other side. Now I want this to kind of catch a little bit of light, not too much. I definitely want it to catch some. Same thing on the other side. Under the chin. Now, of course, you know, you could have all kinds of blood kind of matted into the fur, depending on how fierce you want this guy to look, but we're just gonna, I just want to emphasize the markings here. So you can see I've done this little white, little bit of white trim around the ears. Let's go back to this lighter tan, yellow color. You can see it kind of bounce back and forth between the two. Now while I've got this lighter tan color, why don't I do a little bit of work on these teeth. Let's find some of the olive drab, thin that down. Made some definition here. We'll do the gum line in the next the next kind of section of this, that final detail work. While I've got the color, I'm kind of doing a little bit on the skulls, maybe a little bit of, add a few lights to the base. Just kind of keep everything tied together, everything in line. Go a little bit lighter even. So this is almost pure verdigris. Here by his snout. Okay. So I'm going to put out some transparent red so that we can do some work on the gums, kind of finalize the eyes, and some other details around the figure. So I've put some of the transparent red out here on the palette. Got it next to my blue liner paint. See, I've got kind of a nice purple there. And what I'm going to do is, let's get this so you can see it. I'm going to put some of this here to use as a nice color for the gums. Also, his tongue. I'm going to press this here, make sure get the inside of his mouth. I kind of turn this upside down. Oh, my thumb's in the way. There. Pretty much. That sits up. Darks pretty well. So let's go a stage lighter here. I'm even going to use a little bit of the verdigris. And let's see if I can set this up for you here. Okay. Working on his tongue. I don't want to go too bright or too red too quickly. Okay. So the next level up, I embrace this and do just the tip of the tongue. And just a few dots on right there. And one last step up, this time mixing in a little bit of the yellow, just doing maybe a tiny little a little dot there. See if I can manage the same thing on the end of the tongue. You could also put a little gloss varnish on there too. If gone too far. We've got our dark handy. Take it down. Normally I'd be working in a magnifier, So this is it's a little more difficult for me to see. It's all about making sure that you can see it. So that's about all it takes. It's not much, just a little subtle thing. Now we've still got our black over here. Let's do some work on the eyes. So what we're going to be working on then is some of this, pupils. So what I'm kind of making more defined here, and the nose. So this is the kind of stuff that we've done just did here. That's the kind of stuff we're going to do here. So I'm going to do this so it works for my hands, that they're braced, but also so that you can see it. There's the iris there. And make sure there's enough of a dark outline around that. So we did this eye. Let's kind of spin this around so we can do the other one. And I'm kind of holding this upside down because I want the pupil to be attached to that upper eyelid, not the bottom one. Don't want him rolling his eyes, that wouldn't be good. So the other thing I'd want to add at this stage maybe are these his whiskers. He doesn't have whiskers, obviously, so we have to kind of give the impression that they're there. I'm going to try and get this in position. Got my brush here, and I'm going to do just some subtle dots in a row. Some small little dots there. Set this up. Hopefully my thumb's not in the way. So we have some nice little marks for where his whiskers are going to go. While I've got this dark, I'm going to pick out some other darks where I want those to go. These marks under the eyes. Do a little definition on the teeth here. That's good. I still have some of my blue left here. What I want to do is put even more of a highlight on top of the nose. So hopefully you can see. So just adding a little bit more. I'm going to add a few little details to the top of the head. I'm going to go in with some tan here on the muzzle. Right there on the top of the muzzle, a little bit right there. Just stop. Now we've got this, I think it's ice yellow is what it's called. Got some of this, so let's put a few hints of this out there. Also, going to use that to put the little highlight on the eye. So I want it to be halfway over the pupil, because that's nice and dark. I just put a little dot right there. I don't even know if you can see it. What I just put in was this. Just put that in. And what I wanted to do is have it hanging half over pupil and a little bit over the rest of the eye. So again, other parts of the fur, I'm going to bring this out a little more. Now again, yes, that was a wolf face that I just did, but there's a lot of other animals. That eye is the same for birds. It's the same for lots of other mammals, even cats, lions, tigers. Oh my, they're all going to have an eye just like that. Just like I did before, I can dab a little color on there, take it away. And at this point, I'm still thinking in terms of the directional brush strokes. I want to work with the direction of the fur. I don't want to work against it. So I'm going to go one step lighter on the highlight. It's on the end of his nose here. Just about like that. Underneath that. Okay, good. Just want to bring out a little bit of that. You can see we're really getting close to what we've got here. And I know some of what I'm doing looks like just maybe some random brush strokes. It's really not random. I'm just going around. See, I wanted to make this, even though that would normally be kind of a white marking, I want to make sure there was enough shading there because he's got this snarl to his face. Not happy about something. I want to even emphasize this a little more here. So we've got our transparent red. I want to do the insides of the ears, so hopefully you can see I'm just putting a little bit of this pinkish color down into the ears. I don't want to get too bright with it, it's just an indication, and that's all. Just leave that alone. Pick out a few areas on the tail here. A few more little touches on the legs, but I'm gonna say this is Feeny for now. If this is, it's as far as you want to take it. So hopefully you've had fun painting some wolf fur, and I hope that this is information you can translate on bears, cheetahs, leopards, whatever other furry critter you have in mind.
face. I am aware of how to find your trace. So good and mild as if you're in a child. It's calling you to be free and wild. The game you'll play, you'll dance the night away, laughing as you're gonna stalk your prey. Fancy dress or in your darkest best. Well, here is the place where you can join the rest. Pray for me, and if you so believe, and let me hear your words.
And do not weep for
I
me.
live and I learn from what I have discerned. Look, go and say those words.
And do not weep for me.
Embrace this night with all of your might. Look, go and say those words.
And do not weep for me.
And live this way until the end of your days. Go and say those words. And do not weep for me. Place of gold where winds are blowing cold. And here is where that all your tales get told. From last to glad, or both good and both bad. For here is where